psychology, sociology can get you only so far in understanding the human condition.
Yeah.
Because it treats us either as brain on the lowest level, mind, which we don't understand, consciousness, but it treats us as brain or mind, psychology, but it doesn't get to the deep problem of human condition, and that is our failures and our guilt, our sense of shame and guilt. And how do you resolve that? The only way you resolve it is by forgiveness.
Appreciate your time. A lot of as I mentioned to you, a lot of the calls that I'm doing or people that I'm interested in talking to, I think bring a lot of wisdom from one aspect of human nature to another. And my goal is to, learn as much as I can from that, tie it back into what people, of any age, but particularly young adults, could leverage to either live better, live more fulfilled, make better decisions, anything like that. So if you don't mind, maybe a quick intro of yourself, some background, and then we can kind of jump into some of the questions I sent you ahead of time.
Okay. Yeah, so I was born and raised in Mexico. My mother was Mexican. My father was from the United States. So I lived a lot of my early years in Mexico, Argentina, and then New Jersey. But my dad being an engineer, and I was pretty good at math, but really poor at reading, I started gravitating towards the sciences. And I guess early in my life, I really developed a thirst, kind of like what you're experiencing now, to understand the universe on a profound level, and then secondarily understand my place in the universe. So really that's, in a way, sounds like your journey, although mine was maybe more simple, not to help other people, just sort of more self-focused in that sense. But and so I grew up in the Catholic Church, and so I had gone through the Catechism and First Communion and did all that. But for my parents, it was an obligation. When they got married in the Catholic Church, they had to raise their children in the Catholic Church. But when I graduated from high school, I came to college in the United States, and I stopped going to church. And I was introduced in college to a lot of sort of humanistic ideas, philosophy of Sartre and other things. And it was really,
Sartre?
Yeah, Jean-Paul Sartre.
Okay. And also I'm going to just take some notes too.
Sure.
And if I periodically look to my left, I'm just making sure that the laptop hasn't died.
Okay. So as a freshman at an engineering college, we had to take math and science and chemistry and physics, and computer science, but we also had to take one humanities class. And here I am, 17 years old, and I walk into humanities class where we're studying the Greeks, and the professor says, every man has to ask himself the question, should they kill themselves? And if not, why not? That was 17 years old, walking into college, and you're confronted with that sort of heavy question.
Yeah, maybe a little different than today's 17, 18-year-old, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure how, because I'm now in my 70s. So that was part of a thread that was happening in my life, being challenged to think by what I would call today maybe atheistic philosophy professors that were just not really giving me substance, but just challenging what we knew. And then on the other side, there really seemed to be a foundation of truth in science and math, right? Because it's verifiable, you do experiments, it's empirical, and I was good at that. And so in writing and reading, I was very poor. So my first essay for my humanities class, I got a D. In my first math class test, I think I got a 99. And so what am I going to do? Choose humanities or choose math?
Yeah, play to your strengths.
Right. And so at that point, because of the scientism that I was being introduced to and the philosophies that were challenging my religious beliefs, I gave up going to the Catholic Church. I never really believed in God. There were times in my life where I reached out for God, but never really was never really satisfying. And so I became an atheist, a very deliberate atheist, sort of a, and I would even go to youth groups, Christian youth groups, just to challenge them and mess them up. Just like my philosophy professors were messing me up, I was going to mess them up. And so through undergraduate school and then into my first 2 years of graduate school, I would have considered myself an atheist, an evolutionist, materialist. The only thing that's real is what is
what
tangible.
We can prove, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And then I went to a wedding of a gal who was working at Scripps Institute of Oceanography that she invited me to, and I had this encounter with her father that changed my life. And so as I got to the door of where the wedding was, this man reached out his hand and shook my hand and welcomed me to the wedding. And it was really curious because the whole time before the wedding he would talk to me. And then at one point he said, "Could you excuse me, Ray? I have to give my daughter away in marriage." And I went, wow, this guy is spending his time with me, a complete stranger, not with his guests, not with his family. And then after the ceremony, he comes back to me and spends the reception just chatting with me. So there was a connection because he was Mexican American and I was Mexican, and so we could talk in Spanish, we could talk in English, and then as the wedding was winding down, he says to me, "Would you like to come to our house for dinner?" And I go, "Okay." And so my wife will make tacos or something, and I go, "Sure." And so he says, "You drive because I don't have a car." And so we're going to my car, and he asks me a question, "Do you believe in God?" And I go, "No." He goes, "Do you believe in the Bible?" And I go, "No, it's a bunch of fairy tales." "Do you believe in Jesus?" And I go, "No." So we had this 3-hour conversation, argument. I was trying to disprove everything about the Bible, and he was trying to lead me to Christ, right? And so after 3 hours, I said, "Okay, I gotta go." And so he goes, "Would you do me a favor?" And I go, "Okay." And so he puts a song on a record player. Remember, you probably are not old enough, but we had records.
Yeah, I've seen those on TV.
Yeah. You've seen them on, yeah. And so he puts the stylus on this song, and the guy is singing the song about a guy that had a great life. He had everything, in life. He had a family, friends, a good job, everything. But the song singer said there was still something missing. And the song singer said that in the song that what was missing was God or Christ. And so then he took the stylus off. And that song kind of resonated with me because at that point, I'm 23, 24 years old. I had a condominium. I had a car. I had a full ride at UCSD. I had no problems. I had everything given to me, right? Yeah. But still there was some deep gnawing thing that there was something still missing in life that I didn't have from all my science.
Couldn't put your finger on it.
Right, right. And so then he takes the stylus off and he asks me this weirdest question I ever heard in my life. He said, "Ray, is there any reason why you wouldn't want to accept Jesus?" And I go, "Man, I've been telling you for 3 hours why I don't want to." What kind of ridiculous question? But out of my mouth comes the word no. Yeah. And so where did that come from? And so he calls his family and they start praying for me and then they stop and he goes, "Do you feel anything?" And I go, "No." So they keep praying and then all of a sudden the words come out of my mouth, "Jesus, please come into my heart." And they stopped praying, they gave me a little Gideon's Bible and they shoved me out the door. So
is that like an earlier version of a Bible, or that was
there's
like
just a little? So there's these people that go to colleges and they give out these little New Testaments. So it's just the New Testament. And
okay.
They try
pocket size. You can take it wherever you go. Easy to have on your person. Okay.
Yeah. And so that was actually July 14th, 1975. The specific moment that my whole life changed. And I started reading the New Testament, and I read it in just a couple days, and I realized that everything that I didn't like about religion, neither did Jesus. So it just kind of opened up my whole worldview, and so my whole life changed, and the direction of my life changed. So what's important to understand about Judeo-Christianity, and more importantly for me, Christianity, is that a lot of people think that it narrows a person.
Yeah.
But it doesn't narrow a person. It actually broadens your view.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have to stop understanding science or math or any of those things.
Yeah.
But this gave me an overarching, broader view of humanity and the things that interested me.
Yeah.
And so at that time, I was in a graduate course in general relativity, which is no easy thing, right?
Yeah. Is that physics?
That's physics, yeah.
Okay.
That's Einstein's theory of general relativity, which,
Yeah.
you know, when he first published it, they said maybe only 2 or 3 people in the whole world could understand it, right?
Yeah.
And here I am in grad school thinking about this, and we had to write a paper on general relativity. And I came up with this mathematics of how the entire energy content of the universe is actually zero. In fact, there's no positive content of anything. If you want to think in Eastern terms, sort of the yin and the yang, it all is neutral, right? So there's positive particles, there's negative particles, there's positive energy, there's negative energy, there's momentum going one way, there's momentum. And so I did this enormous physics calculation to calculate that the total, in fact, material content of the universe is zero. And I go, I think I remember somewhere in the Bible that it said, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth from nothing. And I go, wow, you know, and so
first sign of piecing your old life to your new perspective.
My new life together. In fact, at that time when I wrote that paper, I was still an atheist at that point. But I had remembered reading that Bible thing or hearing it, and so I had to go to the library to actually find a Bible because I didn't own one, and that started piecing things together for me. Yeah. And so then my next number of years, I started teaching at Mesa College, and there was a chemistry teacher there that taught a course called Issues in Science and Religion.
And what is this, late 70s or?
This is 1976.
Gotcha. Because I did 2 years at Mesa. Yeah. So it's just crazy how.
Yeah. So this guy had a huge lecture auditorium, and the students were flocking to this guy's class. So because it explored Judaism, Greek philosophy, Islam, Christianity, science, the whole thing, right? This was an overarching class, kind of that touches on all the issues that you're interested in. And he said, Ray, I need another teacher to help me because this class is just growing so big. So I sat in on one of his classes for an entire semester to tool up to then take my own lecture hall. And so I had a lecture hall of 120 people looking at the history of Western philosophy, science, religion, and everything. So it was kind of cool. So as a baby, I was thrown in to all of these issues, having to study all of these issues. And so reading a lot of source material, philosophy, and everything. So it was really cool. Yeah. And so that's the kind of the trajectory of my life. And for the past 48 years now, I've been a student of the Bible, philosophy, science, math, and all that. So putting all that into my life. Yeah. So that's the short version.
And I, it's interesting you say that because like I myself always, identified as, let's say, an atheist as well, up until kind of similar to you. And, not saying I identify with any one religion versus another, but, for me personally, the path that I went down, I started getting into Taoism, as I said earlier, but through the lens of psychology. So are you familiar with Dr. Wayne Dyer?
Yeah.
Got it. So he was a clinical psychologist.
He's on PBS.
So, and it was interesting because anytime I Google him, it's usually, kind of a self-help audio tapes and, cassettes and all that. But he did an analysis on the 88 verses of the Tao Te Ching. And I just thought, here's one guy who's a huge psychology scientist proponent that I like a lot. Yet he's talking about how, one of the more true things he's ever read or studied
Yeah.
was some of this ancient philosophy.
Yeah.
And I just thought, okay, that's, that just seems conflicting from what I know today.
Yeah.
So that really was the first thing that opened up my eyes to, okay, well, there's probably something to learn out there with, a lot of
Yeah.
people are religious, and there's, a lot of people go to church on a daily basis sometimes. So I just figured, okay, well, at least the upbringing that I had, my parents were great. But I also just we made success without religion or that form of moral guidance.
Yeah.
But similar to you, I kind of felt like, let's say something was missing, or that I had more time and money than ever, yet I still felt like I wasn't as fulfilled on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis until I started studying this stuff. So
Yeah.
similar to you, I felt that I was the smart guy by saying that there's all these stories in religion, and no way someone turned water to wine, or that again with my limited knowledge.
Yeah.
So just similar to you, it felt very eye-opening once I started actually looking into a lot of this stuff.
Yeah. So what you kind of learned from physics, like quantum mechanics and all that, the physicists in the 20th century, in studying the nature of reality, material reality, like electrons and protons, they realized that there were two aspects to particles, or the material that makes up the world. And one aspect is a wave aspect, and another aspect is a particle. And so in different experiments, electrons would behave like bullets, like little particles. They would hit a screen and they would have these discrete dots on the screen. But in other experiments, they would go through slits and behave like water waves. And there was this huge argument. What are electrons? What are elementary particles? Are they waves? Are they particles? Turns out they're both. Okay?
Interesting.
So there's, up until that point, there was no real sort of scientific, for lack of a better word, way of saying that two things that look contradictory are in fact not contradictory, are necessary and complementary for a full understanding. And this is called the two-language approach. So if I look, there was a classic case in fact, this is the mayor of San Francisco was murdered a long time ago by a person that worked in his office, and apparently the guy had been eating too much junk food in the weeks leading up to him shooting the mayor, and that caused a chemical imbalance in his body. And then I guess he got upset and he goes down and he shoots the mayor and kills him. Well, so the argument that the defense attorney used is that he was not in control of himself because of all the junk food changed his imbalance. So he was able to get either a lenient sentence, I forget the sentence, but it wasn't as bad as if he had actually gotten murdered. Because in any description of any situation, there's the insider view and there's the outsider view. There's the participant view and there's the spectator view. So from a spectator, if I'm watching you do anything, play soccer, right? There's a cause and effect relationship in everything that happens on the field. And I can describe all the motions in terms of physics as cause and effect relationships. You kick the ball and it goes in the goal, right? But there's also an insider view. You have the decision whether to kick or not to kick, right? And that isn't imposed on you. So the idea that the insider has certain parameters that they're using to make decisions, which don't negate the fact that the spectator can actually see all the cause and effect relationships, right? And so that's the same thing in science and religion, or science and humanities, that they both they can give us two different views that are both true. That's the amazing thing, right? Where most people think that either or, but what we've learned from physics is that it's not either or, it's both, Now that's not for everything, right? But that's for a lot of things. There's both inside view to things and an outside view. So if you look at Taoism, for example, because you mentioned that, for you to really understand Taoism, you have to immerse yourself in Taoism. You have to actually get the inside view. And the inside view will give you some knowledge, some information that no spectator would do. So you look at the American media, the American media are spectators, and they can criticize, critique, analyze everything, but not understand. You can't understand until you have both views, right? So, in the West, if I was a journalist and I was videotaping black African American, say, Baptist church, and I'm a little white guy, right? And they're in there hooting and hollering and having a great time and singing and doing all that. And as an outsider, I go, oh, look at that behavior. I don't understand it.
Yeah.
But if I actually go into a black African church and immerse myself in that community, I'm going to have a completely different perspective of that community, the inside view, right? And so that's the relationship between science and religion, or science and the humanities, is that you really need both to have the broadest, fullest, most comprehensive understanding of who we are. So even, I think it was last night or 2 nights ago on PBS, there was a thing on the brain, on Nova, and they're analyzing all of the neurons and all that.
What lights up when you see something or touch something.
Right, and so they're trying to say, I don't know if they said it because I didn't watch the whole thing, that you're nothing more than a bunch of neurons and synapses firing.
Yeah.
That's not us.
The atomized individual, right?
Yeah, that's
I've heard that phrase a lot.
the outside view.
Yeah.
But the inside view is, boy, I'm really enjoying this piece of music that I'm listening to. And there's no outside view that can give you that sense of enjoyment that you really get from playing an instrument or listening to music. So that's, so hopefully that's what you'll come to see, that it's not an either or between my scientific analytical way and my immersing myself in these other disciplines.
And so what next thing that comes to mind, and I'm going to actually check or plug in my laptop, but one of the things that I want to ask you next is kind of the history of science through people who were every day, it was just accepted that, God exists, people are religious, but clearly humans developed and started science and started to build that out. So I'd be curious. Okay, awesome. Oh, that's much better. Yep, and can still hear. Yep. Okay. So picking up where we just left off, because one of the main reasons I want to chat with you, because one, you're, again, subject matter expert on, the religion that you practice, but also you were a professor of science, right, throughout your career. So, again, I feel like one of the initial reasons I always identified as, let's say, an atheist was because of those initial glance contradictions, right? It's like, oh, well, we can't have one and the other. Right. Yet the second I learned that they don't contradict each other, now it opens up this huge wealth of knowledge. So that's why I figured you'd be a good person to talk to. So one, I would love your perspective on that. And two, they say, or a lot of folks say that science wouldn't be here without religion or without people who were religious, either exploring that, experimenting, I don't know, but curious your thoughts on that.
So that's where we talked before we went on camera about Greek philosophy. Yeah. So the early Greeks believed in a concept called logos, Logos, which to them was the logic of the universe. Now, you have to separate Greek mythology, which was the religion of the masses, from the philosophy of, say, Plato and Aristotle. Okay. Plato and Aristotle actually believed in sort of a creator God, not the Judeo-Christian God, but sort of a logos, a logic that governed the way the universe was created and made.
Like a higher power, but they couldn't explain it.
Higher power and impersonal, not necessarily personal in the way the Judeo God is. So this God dictated the structure and the logic of the universe. And that word is very deep in their thinking. And so if I'm Aristotle and I'm trying to understand how the universe works, then whatever my mind can conceive, which is consistent with logic and consistent with logos, must be the way things work. Okay? And so they developed a really good structure of developing ideas logically. But the problem is that it didn't work. And so it's not until you get to people like Galileo. Galileo, this is like an important point in the story. He was in a cathedral, and he saw a chandelier swinging in the breeze, and he decided to take his pulse, and he realized that the chandelier was keeping time with his pulse. And so it was like the first time that people could actually measure time on small time scales. So Galileo is important because not only did he observe the universe and how it worked and try to understand how it worked, like them, using logic, but he also was part of the Catholic community. So he believed in a creator God. And so he understood the relationship, or the role rather, of experiment. Because yes, there's a creator God, but this God has revealed himself to us, and he's a personality. So God, the Christian God, could have created a universe with different logics. That's the key. Not just one logic, but different logics. So the role of experimental science requires us to do experiment.
Yeah,
to figure out,
hypothesize and then prove.
Right. And that's the birth of modern science, because now I realize, yes, there's a logic, but now we have to discover what that logic is through experiment. And then he also infused mathematics into it. So mathematics gives you the ability to calculate and then predict. So if I'm firing a cannon or anything, and I have the mathematics to say this is going to happen, and I can predict where it's going to go, then I can measure to see if I'm right, right? So it's the infusion of mathematics and experimentation along with the Greek logic. And so now you have sort of a Judeo-Greek mind. You have the logic, but you also have the idea of a personal God that could have created anything he wanted. So let's figure out. So from Galileo, the really next important person in understanding our Western science is Descartes.
And sorry, what year was Galileo?
Yeah, 1500s.
Okay.
So late 1500s, and Descartes was early 1600s. And what the Greeks had done, their logic, and this is really important that very few people understand. So if you ask the Greek, what's a circle? So a circle for a Greek is a hole. And what's a square? A square is a hole. So all the geometric figures were whole. They weren't made up of parts. What Descartes did, and like when you studied algebra, you had your Cartesian grid, right? You could go X, Y, and points on this Cartesian grid. Descartes broke everything up into points in space. So what's a circle for Descartes? It's a collection of points equidistant from a single point. So for Descartes and everybody coming after that, geometrical figures were collections of points.
Yeah, like additional dimensions, basically, right? Is that related, or?
It's just that it's breaking everything up into little pieces.
Okay.
That was the key for me to understanding what people call modernity. That's the transition from the old way of thinking, the Greek way of thinking, that I have to understand the whole. The new way of thinking is I need to understand the parts and then build the whole.
Okay.
Okay, so there's a lot going on there, but
yeah,
that allowed Newton to build calculus. And once you could build calculus, you can understand time and changes and how everything works.
Yeah. New perspective opens up new doors.
Yeah.
The next generation possibly can use those new doors to discover something new.
And all of the entire modern world wouldn't have been possible without Newton or Leibniz's development of calculus. We wouldn't have science. We would be still chopping things, rolling wheels, and all that.
Yeah.
So now, why is that important? Why are Newton wrote? I mean, he wrote about gravity, about physics, the laws of physics, about calculus and mathematics. He did a lot of alchemy or early chemistry. But of all the science and math that he wrote more commentaries on the Bible than he did on all on all of his science.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you don't ever hear about that.
I was going to say, the common knowledge is he was, origins of science.
Right.
Okay.
But he was deeply profound Christian who was very involved with understanding the Bible. Now, if you ask people who's the smartest person that ever lived, certainly on that list would be Newton. He was profound in development of mathematics and of physics. And then you ask people, who else would you put on that list? The German Leibniz. Leibniz is described as the last person to know everything.
Got it. I was going to say, I had full transparency, never heard of that name, or maybe I did a long time ago in school and just completely did not register the importance of this person, but go on.
So the two smartest people that have ever lived were both deeply and profoundly Christians, right? And they were the best mathematicians and scientists, and the most profound. So,
and that was just something accepted back in the day as well, right? There wasn't a lot of atheists, or what we understand as atheists today.
There really weren't atheists, right? Because for all the human history to that point, no matter where you are in the world, you're believing in some kind of a being outside of just what we experience, right?
Got it. Some higher power.
Correct? There were no really atheists before that, and it's not until you get to a French physicist mathematician by the name of Laplace, who, in a treatise on the motion of heavenly bodies, on the physics of how the heavens move, that he wrote his treatise and he didn't give any lip service to God. And people said, you didn't even mention God in this. And he said this, I have no need of that hypothesis. So in a sense, that is the beginning of the crack. So it's kind of like the Judeo-Christian religion blending with Greek philosophy gave birth to science. And all of the things that come out of science come out of this. And so that's the baby. Science is the baby of Judeo-Christian and Greek philosophy. And then the baby grew up and killed God.
Interesting.
I don't have need of God anymore. Right?
Because basically people started to think, there's a lot in the world we can understand without including the concept of God, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
So you come full circle to today. So you might look at something as interesting as the human DNA. And how do you respond to the intricacies of the human body? Well, you can respond in two ways. As a Christian, you look and you understand the DNA and all the intricacies of the cell and how complicated it is, and you go, oh my gosh, look how wonderfully God made this. Or you can respond as an atheist and go, oh, I understand all of this. But you really don't. So, I mean, it's just, again, what happens in the lab, whether you're a scientist or an atheist, shouldn't, in other words, you shouldn't be able to distinguish an atheist from a Christian in the lab while they're doing science. It's once they step out of the lab that their philosophies impose on their worldview. So you get people like Richard Dawkins, who thinks religion is just a bunch of garbage, yet he understands that religion is very important for society. Right? Because without it, we would be really messed up. So,
and I think even nowadays, there's this new phrase termed the Christian atheist, right? Where it's, let's say they, traditionally would have identified as an atheist, but also understand that a lot of the preachings and what would we call them? The moral guidances of religion are necessary for society to function, and even for an individual to live healthier, right? Like if I'm a total, atheist and say, oh, well, I can go murder someone and not feel any impact of that, versus religion would say that that's a sin and I would be now in hell because I'm now suffering from whatever made me feel bad about killing that person, correct?
Well, okay, so you touched on that, so let me... So if you look at science, right? If you look at the simplest science, which is physics, actually people avoid it, but it's the simplest.
I was going to say, I took one class in high school and avoided it afterwards, unfortunately.
And then chemistry builds on physics.
Uh-huh.
So you need to know a lot of good physics before you can really do chemistry. Now, that's not true, but logically, chemistry builds on physics.
Mm-hmm.
There is no chemistry without physics, and then there's no biology without chemistry and physics.
Mm-hmm.
And then past biology, you get into psychology. Once you're looking at the human being, the human being is so complicated. In fact, the brain, with over 100 billion neurons, and the total number of pathways to the brain through the brain, is the most complex system in the entire universe, more complex than the rest of the physical universe. So once you get to the human, and now you're interested in human questions, psychology, which you've mentioned, and then from psychology you get to communities of people, sociology, and everything builds on what was before, right?
Yeah.
So here's the fundamental question. If in the beginning all there was elementary particles, and the only difference between the universe now and the universe at the beginning was the arrangement of these elementary particles. And if there's no soul, spirit, mind in elementary particles, is there a soul, a spirit, or a mind in a human being or in a community? And so the strict atheists are called reductionists. They think that even the most complex systems, humans, societies, everything, are reducible to elementary particles.
Got it.
So there is really no meaning to us.
Yeah, and that's
right?
where the term like the atomized individual
Right.
comes in, right? Where it's, if you aren't religious and you are strict atheist, as you said, then you only feel that these are particles that all build up, and that's eventually evolved over time, and then we became creatures that move and all that, right?
And so you and I right now are an illusion. You think you're carrying a conversation with me, but in fact, all that's happening here is the particles in our systems are creating this illusion that we are real and we have a sense of position or place in this world or purpose. But that's all illusion.
Yeah.
It
Stemming off
doesn't
of
really
like
matter.
the evolution of, because the way that I always saw it as well was, let's say humans, our core purpose of living is to reproduce and to live, right? Is to try to avoid death and try to reproduce. That was just what I initially thought.
So just to push the envelope, if you're a strict atheist, there is no purpose. Okay? Because once you introduce the word purpose, then that's called teleological language.
Okay.
And atheists want to expunge teleological language from their description of how the universe works.
Got it. Because it's not...
But it's impossible.
Okay.
You can't be consistent and take away purpose out of our language.
Yeah.
But here's the crux. Psychology, sociology can get you only so far in understanding the human condition.
Yeah.
Because it treats us either as brain on the lowest level, mind, which we don't understand, consciousness, but it treats us as brain or mind, psychology, but it doesn't get to the deep problem of human condition, and that is our failures and our guilt, our sense of shame and guilt. And how do you resolve that? The only way you resolve it is by forgiveness. So the difference between Judaism and Christianity is that the forgiveness had to be paid for by the individual. So I had to take an animal to the temple and have a sacrifice and get a sense of forgiveness, but it never really solved my own personal problem. So in Christianity, that sense of forgiveness is profound, because in any crime there's always a loss. If I steal something from you, you're at a loss if I don't get caught. If I get caught, I'm at a loss, right? There's always loss in a crime. And so there's none of the world religions deal with the loss except Christianity.
Interesting.
Because God paid for the loss. He takes that loss on himself.
Got it.
And that's where true forgiveness comes in.
Like he died for your sins, right?
But to understand that, everybody can say that.
Yeah.
But to actually understand it is very profound, in the sense that your dad's a lawyer, right? Let's say I'm on trial and he's trying to, convict me, and he does a good job, and I am convicted. I am caught. I'm found guilty. I'm convicted, and the judge says, "This is your sentence for what you've done. You got to go to jail for 18 years or whatever." In that moment, I would imagine that any human being would have this profound sense of horror or loss or shame, however you want to couch it, or guilt. And then all of a sudden, the judge says, "I will pay the penalty for you. I will go to jail in your place." A person that experiences that transaction has to just feel this incredible thing that I've never felt.
Yeah.
We give lip service to it, but some of the great stories in Western literature, like A Tale of Two Cities, is all about another person paying the debt for somebody else and taking the guillotine. Or Les Miserables. The reason that one is really important.
I was going to
Same thing.
Yeah.
Same thing, right? The lead character is robbing from this priest, and the priest says, no, here, take more.
Yeah.
To actually experience forgiveness on that level is what true Christianity is about. And there are very, very few people that have experienced that. Very few.
Yeah. Well, just thinking of the Les Miserables, like I know that the scene that you were talking about, or at least in the most recent remake with Hugh Jackman, which I thought was really good.
That one is actually very good.
Yeah. So, but I remember the scene because that's where he feels very conflicted because he just did something that he thought he was going to have to pay for, or he also just got out of jail for 10, 15 years, and then now he says, okay, wow, like this individual of faith and religion is now, making me feel very conflicted because of how gracious he's been, or how forgiving.
That's the key word. He's extending grace to him, mercy. He's giving. So that's the analogy between what God does for us, right? As what that priest did for Valjean, or what I forgot.
Jean Valjean.
Jean Valjean.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, his life changes, right? Now, his trajectory of his life is to do good for others, right? And and
then he takes on his adopted daughter, and then raises her, and she experiences how selfless her father was, and she has all these benefits from it. Okay,
so that's the Christian story, hidden in the French Revolution. Right? Yeah. So that's what great Western literature has been. Yeah. So what I don't like about Christian movies is that they're nothing. I mean, they're
maybe just interpretations of the Bible.
Yeah, or in your face stuff, rather than some really well written, profound story that is trying to explain the Christian the Christian gospel, basically.
Yeah. Well, and they say that a lot of movies or good stories these days, and probably throughout human history, were ones where let's say there was common themes, right? Like, let's say a individual who something bad happens in their life that sets them on a new path. Maybe they experience, a great, all the way up to the climax of the journey. Boom, problem resolved, right? And there's a lot of these. Let's say the hero and the anti-hero, and then a bunch of stuff like that. Like where I don't know if that's rooted in either Greek plays or stories, but something, maybe you can elaborate on that. But I know that when they typically have those human nature philosophies embedded into the stories, then we find them as humans when we watch them, find them more intriguing, or, oh man, that was a really feel-good movie because it checked those boxes. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a standard sort of narrative for good storytelling and good movie making. It's called the I forget what it's called, something like the myth of the hero, and there's these stages that the hero has to go through. Right? Yeah. Or there's this conflict, or it looks like all is lost, but then it comes back. But so those go back to Greek thought and all that. All the Greek plays explore all that. But today it's been so codified that you basically have to write a story like that. So like Lucas in Star Wars, he's drawing on all that tradition and writing that play or that movie line based on all that tradition of the hero, the journey. I think it's called the hero's journey, is sort of the philosophy behind the trajectory of great storytelling.
Yeah, which makes sense, you know. And again, like, because I'm always trying to think about things in terms of commonalities and overlaps in any culture, society, stories, and it all tends to boil back to some truisms for humans, right? And again, if there's some logic or sense in as to why those stories are intriguing to us, then it makes sense, you know. Especially, and I'm sure in other languages too, and in other cultures. But
so we can analyze who you are by asking you a question. Would you rather be on a roller coaster or a merry-go-round?
I feel like the wise thing would be to say the merry-go-round. Is that correct?
Boring. Okay. You want to be on a roller coaster, right?
Yeah.
That's what you're saying. So the movies want you to experience that roller coaster ride. You know, you have the up and down, everything looks good, but no, you're going down. So that's the more exciting story that resonates with humans in a way, I guess.
Yeah, I guess why I thought the merry-go-round is because I know that, or at least with the psychology literature that I've read, you know, a lot of people, including like Navy SEALs, they say, you know, if you're trying to get really good at something, develop consistency and discipline with it, right? And you can't always rely on motivation, because motivation, you feel really good, and then you know, kind of up and down, maybe you lose enthusiasm with whatever project you're doing. But if you establish, you know, hard discipline towards, okay, every day I'm gonna, you know, eat better and work out. Over time, you're gonna, you know, be in shape and feel good, and so that's just why it came to mind for the merry-go-round.
So, but for example, in your life, right? You went to college, you did well, you got your job, you're set in your job, everything well, and now what are you doing? You're saying, hey, I have this free time and I want to give back to humanity, I want to explore this.
Yeah.
Well, you want to be on the roller coaster.
Yeah.
See, because you're not content just with that nice, simple, safe, comfortable life.
That makes sense.
You want to go deeper, so that requires risks, right? So you put out a podcast. Nobody listens. Nobody, you know, you get bummed. But the discipline behind that is to stick with it, right? Because things aren't naturally going to happen easily, right? So,
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and then I know. So I guess back to the or what we were when we were talking about how. People who religion was just accepted in life, yet people still started to explore ways that eventually gave birth to science, and, you know, over time became the world that we know. So what else on the, and again, I'm just thinking of like the Jordan Peterson Logos and Literacy. I don't know if you've come across that. But he talks about how, or it was a documentary on how once the Bible was manufactured at scale with the printing press and then was distributed, that kind of catapulted humans into trying to be better educated and trying to be more literate, because they found that association with logic and providing sense to things. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, or if there's something I'm missing there.
So, so before the printing press, right?
That was like the Gutenberg
Bible and that. So before that, in the West, the Catholic Church basically controlled the narrative. So the priests, the scribes, or the people in the church were the only ones that could read the Latin Vulgate translation. And so most of the people were illiterate, or at least if they went to church, they required the priest
to translate for them.
Yeah, as an intermediary. So the church was teaching people what their source material was for understanding their world. And like so many things in human nature, the church became corrupt. Right? And so they didn't just take the Bible, they were adding their own things to get money. And so one of the things was indulgences. They said, you give us some money, basically, I'm paraphrasing, and we can, with that money, we can pray for the souls that are in purgatory, and they can get out of purgatory and get a jump start on heaven, right?
Got it.
So they manipulated people to get money, and that was really horrible. So the German priest, Martin Luther, saw the sheer lunacy of all that. And in 1517, he hammers 95 theses, which are his complaints against the church. He didn't want to break with the church, but he wanted to reform the church, right?
Because humans tend to tilt towards corruption with power.
Right. And everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And so the long shot of it is that because the press was already extant, his 95 Theses got copied and published and sent everywhere. It was really meant to be an academic exercise for the church, but it became open to all these people reading it. And that led to the Reformation, the Protestant Reformation. So two things. One, now people could read the Bible in their own language because he translated it from the Latin into German. And he unified Germany, because before Germany was just a whole bunch of city-states that had their own little separate languages. He created a common language for Germany. Germany exists because of Martin Luther's Bible. Right?
Yeah, because eventually they were Prussia, right? Or did they become Prussia? Because Prussia, to my understanding, is now Austria and Germany, correct?
And maybe Poland and parts of that, right? It was big. It was a whole area. And I don't necessarily understand Prussia that well.
Sure.
But yeah, there were basically Germanic tribes in this area
that he unified through the
Bible. I mean, that wasn't his intent, but that was the result of what happened. And then the same thing happens with Wycliffe translating it into English, and then it got translated in all these languages. Now people are reading it for themselves. And so the deal of the Protestant Reformation was to say sola scriptura, that our only authority is going to be the Bible. Now we can read it for ourselves and see where we have been manipulated before.
Got it.
So the Catholic Church has always insisted, yes, sola scriptura, but also traditions that have been handed down. And so the Protestants broke with that. So the problem with that is that everybody reading it for themselves can come up with their own interpretation. So you get fragmentation. So the sad history of the Protestant Reformation is the continual fragmentation of the church. So before you just had two churches, the Eastern Church and the Western Church, the Catholics and the Greek Orthodox or the Orthodox Church. And then the Catholics broke into two, Protestants and Catholics, and then the Protestants broke up.
And is that because they had their own interpretation of it, and they basically said, okay, well, us, a group of people, we all believe this interpretation versus that group believes that interpretation, so we're going to separate and become our own branch?
Basically. Okay. I mean, that's a simple way of saying it, but even today, in the Methodist Church, there's been a fragmentation because part of the Methodist Church today accepts gay and lesbian pastors and preachers. Others no, right? So there's a break on how they're doing that, and so they separate. Yeah, and that's just
a good
one example
of today, or
people
would
happening today, right? So, and or more mundane, we're remodeling the church, and we want pews just like we've always had. The other people go, no, we want chairs. Oh, let's break. I mean, that sounds silly, but human nature, right? People don't want to change, and some people want to change, and that's enough within Protestant church to create schisms.
Well, and in society, right? Even, and I'll probably get to it at some point, but let's say, or what a lot of folks will call the counterculture, right? And sometimes that evolves over time and becomes now the majority. Then now, kind of what I emailed you about, like the Tower of Babel, right? Where you got people who strongly believe one thing and a whole different group that strongly believes another, and maybe now they can no longer coexist on either the same land, and that's probably how a lot of wars have happened over human history.
Yeah, the United States is in a precarious position right now, really. I mean, because...
that's one of the reasons I started really getting into this stuff, because, again, I just like psychology and human nature, and maybe because there's been a lot of craziness happening.
Yeah, and, well, I'm going to throw out something in the AI. Have you looked at AI?
I use ChatGPT every day.
Okay, so now with ChatGPT and more modern versions, it's almost where do you actually get information, because just the other day, there was somebody posted something of an explosion at the Pentagon. Actually affected the stock market until people figured out that was just an AI invented story.
Wow.
So with AI now, you watch the news, you watch something online, whatever you did, do I believe it or not believe it?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you vet these things now?
It's a total change.
It's total scary.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But so the launching of new information with the printing press that created a mass educated population. But even our government, right? And you mentioned the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and all that stuff. The Federalist Papers, which were the big ideas that were the foundation of the United States, have phrases like this: without an educated, moral population, this democracy cannot exist.
Yeah.
And that's what we're losing, right? We're losing that moral, educated population.
Yeah.
And
we're seeing how the consequences of it.
Yeah, we're seeing the consequences. So the founding fathers predicted what would happen if we lost that base.
Yeah.
And all the big universities like Harvard and all those were all created so that people could read the Bible. And have that moral base as a foundation for our country.
Yeah.
So
I guess jumping a step back, because I know part of what I had emailed you on was what I had learned was British common law was, again, modern day West, right? So British common law was very unique in human history because it put the individual at the center of everything, right? So the sovereignty of the individual, I don't know if that's a British common law phrase, but basically where it says, that the individual should be an individual, not a part of a group, not under the state, not, anything like that. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not sure about it, but I think two things are necessary. And one is the elevating the rights of the individual, but at the same time elevating and affirming the rights of the community, so that the rights of the individual never trump the rights of the community, but at the same time the rights of the community cannot trump the rights of the individual. Whenever that happens, right, you get totalitarianism.
Yeah.
So I don't think British common law ever simply elevated the sovereignty of the individual, because that leads to other really bad things. I can go kill you, and it's my right to do that.
Got it.
So it had to maintain this balance between the two. And I don't know if you're a Star Trek friend, but there was this one Star Trek movie where Spock is in this chamber and he's gotten radiated. And Captain Kirk is on the outside seeing his friend die inside, and Spock says something like this: what does he say? I forget the word he used, but the value of the community outweighs the value of the individual. And in the next movie, they flip it, and the value of the individual outweighs the value of the community.
Interesting.
But so they're exploring that same relationship.
Yeah, like the writers were basically.
They're totally on it, right?
Yeah.
But the point is, both have to be maintained with integrity to have a really successful civilization community, right?
And that's the whole purpose of limiting power of the state, limiting power of, let's say, the federal government. So when they even say, like, okay, well, let's manage things on a state-to-state level, right? Because we need to not give too much power to one, branch that oversees the entire nation, because then they can start making decisions that on one side of the country they don't want on the other side of the country, right?
So when the country was created, they wanted to maintain the rights of the state. And give certain authority to the federal, But more and more, the rights of the states are being fragmented or put down in light of that. And what's even scarier for some people is now there's a real push in the West to globalize. So like the WHO, the World Health Organization, and all these other things want control of world health.
Yeah.
No longer is the United States sovereign in our own controlling our health, but now we have to all buy into the World Organization, right?
Yeah.
So it's the notion of pushing towards a one world government is happening right now.
Yeah.
Actually, today.
Yeah. Well, and it's
Yeah.
dangerous
Yeah.
because of the
I
fact that
think
you're
so.
putting too much power. Yeah, and I totally agree.
Yeah.
And so I guess like taking it even a step back for the the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, each of those basically almost assumed that God exists and assumed that everyone had already accepted that.
Right.
Correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and because I know that like with a lot of the, and I'm sure these are long moral documents, but I think a lot of let's say philosophers today talk about how those were some of the most moral documents ever created because they understood that humans can tilt towards corruption if given too much power,
Right.
or just by nature tilt towards corruption.
Right.
So like curious your thoughts on like that. How does that, I mean, there's probably more religious like philosophy behind that more than my simple understanding of it.
Yeah, I mean, so I think this is the way I interpret the Founding Fathers.
Uh-huh.
The Founding Fathers, there was, you've heard the term separation of church and state.
Yep.
So that phrase actually was only in a letter by Jefferson to I believe a Baptist pastor in one of the New England states. That's where the phrase comes from. It was never in the framing of our Constitution or any of the framing thing. So separation of church and state, because it was always assumed that the church was under the authority of God and the state was under the authority of God. So we were both sort of accountable to God, church and state. But what the framing fathers also wanted to do was not have the state impose religion on people.
Yeah.
Right? So that's why they came to these shores, to have their own ability to choose their expression, their religious expression, and not have it imposed. So the separation is not about the state being atheist and the church being atheists. It's about separation of their powers under God. And that has gone completely by the wayside and is not understood by people.
Yeah, because the way I always interpreted it was like, with the separation of church and state, because you don't want the government saying, yeah, hey, everyone has to be Christian, or no, everyone has to be Hindu,
or everybody has to be Catholic.
Yeah.
So in those days, there really wasn't a broader non-Christian consensus, right? Some may argue, there were Muslims here and there, but really there weren't.
Yeah.
Everybody that came to these shores, other than the indigenous people that were already here, were bringing Christian ideas, but their own branches of Christianity, right? We're the Pilgrims, we're the Puritans, we're whatever. Don't tell me I have to be a Catholic, or vice versa, right? So they put the Catholics in Maryland. That's where they all went.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, but the rest of them were like Protestants when they first came here.
Yeah. But each of those I guess Christian based, or I don't know. I keep referring to the phrase Judeo-Christian values because I think with if you're Mormon, Christian, or Catholic, each of those still have the common denominator values of Judeo-Christian values, correct?
Right. Yeah, that's
okay,
right.
got
That's
it.
right.
So then that's basically where, and because they had those shared common values, there wasn't as much dispute back then in terms of kind of what we were just talking about, right?
Yeah, and just a weird tangent. Judeo-Christian is very important.
Uh-huh.
You can't have Christianity without Judaism. It's just impossible, right? Jesus was a Jew. When I was a little boy, maybe 10 years old, I got in a fight with a Jewish friend of mine because I was Catholic, he was Jewish, and I told him Jesus was Catholic. And he goes, no, Jesus was Jewish. I beat him up, right? I was so ignorant.
Yeah.
But yeah, Jesus was Jewish, and everybody that wrote the New Testament, with one exception, were Jews.
Yeah.
So Christianity is really an extension of Judaism. Hitler tried to do away with the Old Testament. That was his first line of attack. Separate Christianity from Judaism so that he could then hammer the Jews, right?
Yeah.
And he did that very, very deliberately. And anybody that does that is really doing very horrible things.
Yeah.
And that's happening in this country today.
Is that
People are
with
trying
the
to
secular?
Yeah.
I don't know what the proper phrase is, and this is a whole bunch of like because I've listened to a bunch of like, let's say Dennis Prager, who I'm sure you've at least heard of at least
I
once.
know Dennis Prager.
Yeah. So and I had no idea who he was up until about 8 months ago, right? So I just never heard of him. But again, he has a lot of content on the Judeo-Christian philosophy, and I guess he has had like a long radio show where he tries to enlighten people on Judeo-Christian values without imposing too much of the Bible. Basically it's like, hey, there's a lot we can learn here, guys, and how we can live peacefully together.
Yeah, he's very Christian friendly. And so what surprises some Christians is that he's not a Christian.
Yeah.
Because, so he recognizes and embraces the good in Christianity. Now, not that all Christians and Christian churches have done the right thing, but if you're looking at it basically ideologically, he understands the good that the Christian community has done and can do. And so he supports that.
And with the secular government, because a lot of the stuff I've learned through both him and Jordan Peterson is, when secular governments come to rise, they usually try to start burning Bibles and trying to get rid of religion so that they can now have more power in the state, and probably something to do with it's easier to control people if they don't have those, the moral guidance or moral principles from Judeo-Christian preachings, correct?
Right. Yeah, so there's, even in popular movies that's been explored. Did you ever read the book Fahrenheit 451? It was about the burning of books.
Interesting. Was that did they do a movie with Robin Williams?
No, it was way before Robin Williams.
Okay.
But and then there's Planet of the Apes. No, not Planet of the Apes. Sorry, The Time Machine. The Time Machine was all about getting rid of the books too. I mean, that idea has been really explored a lot in movies and philosophy and all that.
Like non-religious groups as they try to gain power must eliminate religious teachings.
Teachings and writings
and
books
Soviet
and
Russia.
knowledge in general, right? The more ignorant
true.
I can make you, then the more I can control. So it wasn't just about religion, but
and that was a big thing with Hitler, the Soviet Union, and Maoist China, correct?
Yeah.
Like each of those basically, that was a big part of like their phase one, get rid of all the, religion and art even, I believe, right?
So in terms of Soviet Union, have you heard of Solzhenitsyn?
Solzhenitsyn?
Yeah. So
only through Jordan Peterson.
So he comes to this country thinking, okay, the oppression of communist Russia is really bad. He's going to find freedom and enlightenment in the United States, and what he finds, he's really disappointed. And more recently, there was a young woman who's been interviewed by Prager. She escaped from North Korea. Did you ever see that interview?
Not with Dennis Prager, but she did an interview with Jordan Peterson on his podcast, and I actually saw her get interviewed by some news anchor about the rise of wokeism today and her 2 cents, because I believe she tried to speak about her journey leaving North Korea at either Harvard or Stanford or something, and then they canceled her and basically said, we don't want her talking about this. She's going to cause harm or danger, something like that.
So she comes over here and she gets into Columbia University.
Maybe that's what it was.
And she's overwhelmed by the fact that it had gone woke. You couldn't say certain things. She's going, this is just like
North Korea.
You're changing all our vocabulary. You can't allow us to say certain things.
Changing history. We got to rewrite these books.
So it's scary, right? So these people who are coming out of communism and know the horrors of communism are seeing the seeds of it all here.
That's what made me want to interview my mom as well, just because, again, it's like, there's probably something to learn there, and there's also a lot of information from generations that get passed down, but when you have a younger generation who says, I don't want to talk to anyone who's over 30 years old, there's a lot you're missing out there, clearly. So, so that I always thought that was interesting. And then there was one thing that I was just gonna. Oh, so with the Solzhenitsyn. So I know that again through Jordan Peterson. So I know he did an analysis of Solzhenitsyn's work, and I think one of the main lessons learned out of Solzhenitsyn's work was that every individual basically choosing not to do what's moral or not say the truth all builds up and causes these secular governments or harm or totalitarian regimes or whatever you want to call it. And that's actually, it's not just oh man, Hitler was this really bad guy who like had all this power and was doing this and that. Yes, that part's true, but it was every person underneath him that these small little things build up, and that's actually what causes these things to happen. And I think at least from the past couple hundred years, you usually see them in 40, 50 years where maybe society lost perspective on the last tragedy, and then things start to go bad again, right? Yeah. So I don't know if there's any science behind that or trends.
Yeah, so it's hard to know, but if you look at the history of the entire world, in terms of, say, empires and how long empires last, the average is about 300 years.
Yeah.
And especially if you look at Chinese history, I mean, all the empires last about, there's some that lasted longer and shorter, but basically 300 years.
Yeah.
Whatever corruption happens in an empire, it kind of comes to full fruition at that point. Roman Empire, Chinese empires,
Carthage was that?
Yeah, I mean all of them, right?
Yeah.
So look at the United States. How long have we been around?
About 300 years. Yeah.
So I mean, we're almost feeling the weight of the fact that we haven't been able to maintain the values and disciplines that created us in the beginning,
And do we think it's just an overall, because we've been in this comfortable life so long, our society as a whole has lost perspective on the fact that happens? And then we start to dip into, it's okay to cancel these words and these perspectives. Like, that's totally fine. We're doing what's good.
It's amazing that if there are good people, let's just pretend we're good people, that the good people tend not to engage or complain, or is it because of their comfort or what? Like, let's say I'm a good person and I really don't agree with what the city hall is doing. I've never been to a city hall council meeting or anything. Why haven't I been there to tell, this is silly, right? But to tell the mayor I don't like what he's doing in terms of the way he's dividing the streets for buses, and he's trying to impose that we all stop driving cars.
Yeah.
That's his plan. Well, I'm really upset about that.
Yeah.
But how come I haven't been to a city hall meeting to say anything about it, right? So it's that complacency that good people tend to do it. And for some reason, let's say, argument's sake, the bad people tend to be more activists, and so their voices seem to outweigh those of us that are comfortable and don't want to make any waves. So ultimately, we're complicit, right? Just like what you're saying, we're complicit because we've allowed them to continue to express their voice.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think, again, one of the main reasons I want to have these conversations and try to build towards some positive, force for good is because it would be crappy to see things, burn down and think, oh man, I probably could have done more. I could have, hey, you know what? Maybe I feel confident in my perspective on life, and therefore I should try to share that with others in an attempt for everyone to grow and get better. And so it makes sense. Yeah. And maybe there's some reason I felt the reason to do that. Yeah. But either way, I just think that there's been a lot of scary trends, I think, recently that have kind of made me want to at least be like, okay, well, I'll at least be one of those voices for what I think is good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely interesting. I think with and I've still been studying more of this, but with the whole the arguments that Dennis Prager makes in terms of when you have a God-shaped hole in society, it tends to get filled by something else. Whether it's environmentalism, whether it's transgenderism, whether it's, wokeism, stuff like that, where, it's like, you're the atomized individual, and you know that, or you feel that that, you can do whatever you want, make whatever decisions you want, whatever. And if society starts to adopt that as a whole, then we start to lose out on those Judeo-Christian morals, and then start to think, okay, well, now we can start going down this direction and there won't be any harm. Like, we're revolutionary, and seems to be causing issues, but like, curious your thoughts on that, just in terms of, and I guess even tying this back to, there's a psychologist I like, Jonathan Haidt. Have you ever heard of him?
No.
He did this analysis, and he still does today, called the coddling of the American mind. And it's basically, it was the coddling of the American mind, how good intentions and bad ideas lead to, or led a generation to failure, something like that. Yeah. He's talking about Gen Zs. I'm Gen Z myself, and talks about how people who were born in 1996, when they were, let's say, 12, 13 years old, that's when the internet, became, or the iPhone came out. We're all,
digital natives.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And because we were 12, 13 years old, and, spent the next 10 years or so just glued to our phones, causes a whole bunch of psychopathy and lack of, ability to register social cues. It's easier for kids to chat with their friends online than to go in person and develop those social interactions. And also, let's say, if you think about the helicopter moms, right? The sheltering their kids, don't go out, don't touch this, don't do that. But humans, when you go out and you scrape your knee and you go fall on your bike, those are things that you learn. Those are experiences that you learn from. So the more you coddle your kid and they grow up, now they don't know how to operate in the world, and that causes a whole whirlwind of problems. So he's done some really thorough research on that, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, I agree with all that.
But it was interesting because he's like, hardcore liberal, or at least that's how he identified. And basically, he would always talk about like, hey, even if I consider myself an atheist, I understand that without religion on a society, social level is really bad. Like, we need people to have those good morals and principles. So there's a lot of, and I don't know if he fits into that Christian atheist bucket, but there's a lot of intellects who, they'll continue to say, oh, I'm atheist and blah, blah, blah. But I also understand that religion is incredibly important, and without it, on a society-wide level, then society will collapse, basically. And I actually believe a lot of that idea.
Yeah, and I mean, different societies have had different ways of civilizing their community, right? So in Japan, there's probably a really deep sense of personal shame and responsibility, and that keeps them together to a big degree. So it's not the Christian ethic, but it's a different way of still having morals and the good of the family really impressed on everyone to do what's right for the family. And whether you call that a philosophy or a religion, there has to be some moral, ethical foundation, right, that the society has in order for it to continue to prosper. When you lose that, so so things that 30 years ago we would have thought were impossible are happening today. And things that we would think are impossible today, will they happen tomorrow? Like today, everybody thinks that pedophilia or molesting children is bad.
Yeah.
Everybody, right?
Yeah.
Well, will we in a few years?
Yeah.
There are actually I don't know if he's a psychologist but a Princeton professor who was writing articles, peer-reviewed articles on the right to molest children.
Yeah.
I go, whoa! So those are the seeds of even worse things, that are coming down.
Yeah, and it was funny because I don't know if you've ever seen Law and Order SVU.
No, but I know it's on TV.
Yeah, so it's basically, it's a show where it's these two detectives. They're in New York City, so they deal with homeless people on the street all the way up to the, billionaire Wall Street guys, right? So it's pretty interesting. But it's SVU's Special Victims Unit, so it's usually sexual-related crimes. But it was in 2002 they did, and usually each episode, some are fictional, some are partly fictional based on real cases that happened. But it was basically they there was a psychologist on their team that they'd refer to analyze the criminals. And basically, the episode was on how people who say that, or I think the psychologist was gay, so it says like, yeah, LGBT, blah blah blah. But there's people who will identify as pedophiles or say, hey, we need to be included in that as well. Like, what's wrong with, hey, a guy can marry a guy. How come I can't be with, this minor over here? So that concept, it was already something that had been happening in the late 90s, early 2000s to where they even put an episode on it, kind of showing how crazy that is. Yeah. But that's now happening again, today. So like just kind of interesting that I guess humans tend to make history repeats itself when you're not paying attention to history, at least, right?
Yeah, and the other thing that we're not actually a democratic society. We are a representative society. So we elect our representatives, and then the representatives make the decisions. So in a sense, what we have to control, right, is who we elect. And we've sort of taking a back step on that too, not really studying or being careful to make sure we're electing the right people who then represent us and make the decisions.
Yeah.
So
and it is a lot of politicians these days who will make crazy promises, knowing that will get them better attention and therefore more votes, and therefore boom, now they're in power. Yet they didn't have any cost benefit analyzed way to solve X problem, and now you're just kind of dealing with more and more fires. And it was funny because I was watching this breakdown of, let's say, the city of Portland has gone a little wild the past 10 years or so, and then some people were saying that yes, that's horrible what's happening, but also the people voted for those people to be in power, and it's kind of I think there was a quote that I really liked on that is like you get the people
you deserve.
Exactly, because you voted for them, so it's just interesting that a lot of that tends to come full circle, and again, it's human nature. We tend to so
I think I have to stop now. We could have another one.
No, let's do it.
Sometimes